Bueno, continuamos ahora con el panel Videojuegos y Educación. Como parte de este panel tendremos 3 presentaciones. La primera, Dominio virtual y motivación académica online entre gamers y no gamers, de la doctora Bigmary Sepúlveda López y el doctor Adam Rosario Rodríguez. Simulating Lionfish Behavior, Exploring Artificial Intelligence Through Video Games Approaches, de Carlos Juan Emanuel Díaz Vargas. Y Motivation, Gamification and Language Learning Using Video Games in the English Language Classroom, de Derrick Noel Ferrer González.
Muy buenas tardes. Como nos presentó, soy el doctor Adam Rosario Rodríguez y ando con la doctora Bigmary Sepúlveda. La presentación que vamos a estar haciendo hoy nace de la disertación de Bigmary. Nosotros somos de la Universidad de Carlos Albizu y entonces ella va a estar presentando su disertación y yo continúo después con los análisis de los datos.
Bueno, pues comenzamos con el propósito, que fue examinar si las personas que se consideran gamers tienen mejores dominios tecnológicos y mejor motivación académica para tomar cursos en línea versus las personas que no se consideran gamers. Para ponernos en contexto, está el cambio de modalidad de enseñanza que surgió a consecuencia de la pandemia. Como segundo punto, tenemos que la educación en línea a ese momento fue obligatoria. Y el tercero, que los gamers, partiendo, ¿verdad?, de la premisa de que están acostumbrados al manejo de diversas tecnologías. Dentro del marco teórico tenemos 2 teorías. La constructivista de Jenor Brunner, que es el aprendizaje por descubrimiento, y la segunda, que es la que nos dice que el ambiente debe motivar a los estudiantes a observar, a investigar y aprender para tener un aprendizaje significativo. Dentro de las preguntas tenemos saber las propiedades psicométricas en el inventario del dominio de las TICs, que son las tecnologías de información y comunicación. Número 2, que hace que ciertos estudiantes dominen las plataformas de educación virtual. 3, los gamers pueden tener un dominio de las plataformas de educación virtual significativamente mayores que las personas que no se consideran gamers. Y número 4, ¿cuáles son las competencias de mayor frecuencia de dominio para el grupo de gamers y para el grupo de no gamers? Para la justificación, tenemos que la abrupta implementación de las tecnologías al ambiente educativo ha causado diversos problemas en cuanto al uso de la virtualidad como método de educación. A pesar de que se cree que todos los estudiantes, ¿verdad?, están adaptados y manejan la tecnología, lo cierto es que día a día se puede observar que existen diversas diferencias entre los que manejan la virtualidad y los que no, y los que están motivados a recibir y a trabajar en las clases virtuales. Mediante esta investigación se deseó aportar a investigaciones futuras sobre el dominio de las tecnologías de comunicación e información, del formato educativo virtual y las interacciones entre los videojuegos, entre ser gamer o no serlo. Para el método, tenemos que se contó con un diseño no experimental, instrumental, transversal con un alcance exploratorio y correlacional. Esta investigación fue aprobada por el IRB de la Universidad Albizu. La recopilación de datos fue en línea a través de SciData porque estábamos en la pandemia y el muestreo fue no probabilístico por disponibilidad y conveniencia y se promovió el reclutamiento mediante Facebook, Instagram y Twitter. La muestra estuvo basada de 151 estudiantes de diversas universidades de Puerto Rico entre las edades de 21 a 65 años, en los que la mayoría fueron mujeres con la preparación académica de bachillerato, la afinidad positiva hacia las clases bajo modalidad virtual, y la plataforma virtual de mayor uso fue Blackboard, y no hubo diferencias en cuanto al número de gamers y no gamers. Unos fueron 75 y otros 76. Se utilizaron 3 instrumentos: la hoja de datos sociodemográfico, que recogía información como edad, género, preparación académica, el nivel de gaming, las horas dedicadas semanalmente al juego, el género de preferencia en los videojuegos, afinidad a las clases y las plataformas que se utilizaban para recibir estas clases. También se utilizó la escala de motivación educativa, en la cual se basaba de 28 reactivos divididos entre 7 subescalas. La motivación intrínseca al conocimiento, motivación intrínseca al logro y también a las experiencias estimulantes. También la motivación extrínseca externa, la introyectada y la identificada. Era un formato Likert de 7 puntos que van desde no corresponde hasta corresponde totalmente. Y aquí tenemos la escala de competencias virtuales, que esto fue un instrumento que se realizó, en el cual se recoge la información sobre el dominio que tienen los estudiantes sobre las clases virtuales y los elementos tecnológicos que las componen. Tenía 27 enunciados con 4 opciones de respuesta. No utilizó básico, moderado y avanzado. Este instrumento pasó por un proceso de validez de contenido en el cual habían 5 jueces expertos en la materia.
En el análisis de los datos, nosotros utilizamos el programa IBM SPSS Statistics. Realizamos análisis de factores exploratorios para la escala que se desarrolló. Fue un instrumento desarrollado, el otro ya existía. Dentro de los análisis de las propiedades psicométricas, hicimos los análisis de discriminación de los ítems y consistencia interna para ver si el instrumento demuestra evidencia, por lo menos, de confiabilidad en el proceso. Y pues validez a través del análisis de factores exploratorios, que nos da validez de constructo. También hicimos análisis descriptivo, análisis de correlación y análisis de comparación grupal, porque aparte de la psicometría del instrumento, nos interesaba saber si habían diferencias en las competencias hacia los usos de las tecnologías virtuales en los cursos en línea, entre las personas que se consideran gamers y los que no se consideran gamers. Y ese era como que el propósito principal después de la psicometría, era ese como tal. La escala de competencias virtuales, sus propiedades psicométricas, en el análisis de factores exploratorios, pasó por 3 fases iterativas. ¿Qué significa estas 3 fases? Significa que primero se corre el análisis de factores exploratorios, se evalúa si los ítems no hay conflicto entre ellos con otros factores que no sean ítems ambiguos en cuanto a que me rueda de un factor a otro y contienen valores cercanos a lo que estamos midiendo. En este caso eran valores de 0.30 o más dentro de las cargas factoriales. Y entonces, si se detectaban esos ítems problemáticos, se eliminaban del proceso. Así que en esa primera fase se identificaron 6 factores que explicaban un 63% de la varianza del constructo que se estaba midiendo, pero se tuvieron que eliminar los reactivos 1, 4 y 23 porque confligían, chocaban con otro factor o no tenían carga factorial suficiente. El criterio que habíamos puesto eran cargas de 0.30 o más. Luego pasamos a una segunda fase sacando esos ítems del modelo. En esa segunda fase se redujo a 5 factores, esta vez explicando 62.12% de la varianza, y se tuvo que eliminar el reactivo número 9 porque no logró carga factorial en esa fase. Ahí nos movemos a una tercera fase y ahí nos quedamos con 4 factores, ya no se tuvieron que eliminar más reactivos porque todos quedaron adecuados en ese punto. Y ahí ya calculamos, con esa información, calculamos la consistencia interna mediante el coeficiente alfa de Cronbach y nos dio buenas propiedades de consistencia interna para cada uno de los factores, donde el factor 1, que era sobre las competencias generales, tuvo una consistencia interna de .88, que es adecuado. Lo que se espera es que sea de .70 en adelante para demostrar buena consistencia interna. En factor 2, que era sobre las competencias en hojas de cálculo, eso eran premisas que iban dirigidas hacia si usa Excel, si usa manejo de hojas de cálculo, manejo de bases de datos numéricas, iban dirigidos a eso. Y también logró una buena consistencia interna. Para el factor número 3, que es sobre las competencias en la búsqueda de información, ahí sí son bases de datos, de búsqueda de información como tal, ahí también tuvo una buena consistencia interna, un .72. Y en el factor número 4, que son sobre las competencias en el uso de las plataformas de estudio, que si Blackboard, Moodle, Canvas, todas ellas, lo que se evalúa dentro de esa dimensión, también logró una buena consistencia interna. También calculamos los alfas de Cronbach para la escala de motivación. Ahí podemos ver todas, también lograron buenas puntuaciones de consistencia interna. Y ese fue como el primer paso de análisis, asegurarnos que los instrumentos tienen buena consistencia interna para continuar con los demás análisis. Los demás análisis, pues hicimos correlaciones y comparaciones de grupos, como mencioné ahorita. Dentro de las correlaciones, logramos ver relaciones estadísticamente significativas entre lo que era la búsqueda de información con lo que era la motivación intrínseca al conocimiento, la motivación intrínseca al logro, la motivación intrínseca a las experiencias estimulantes y con la motivación extrínseca de regulación identificada. También encontramos relaciones significativas, moderadas bajas, según el criterio de la escala de magnitud de Champion. Esa escala, pues yo le llamo las 4 pesetas, porque va de una correlación de 0 a .25, representa una correlación baja, de .26 a .50, una correlación lo que es moderada baja, de 51 a 75, una correlación moderada alta, y de 76 a 1, una correlación alta. Ese es el criterio. Cuando digo moderado bajo, pues es basado en ese criterio. Ahí vimos que las competencias en el uso de las plataformas de estudio, pues se relacionó significativamente con la motivación intrínseca al conocimiento, con la motivación intrínseca al logro, con la motivación extrínseca de regulación identificada y con la motivación extrínseca de regulación externa. Lo que no salen son las otras variables que no se relacionaron, que son las otras que estaban en la listita. Cualquier cosa necesitan la presentación, se las hacemos llegar y puedan ver todos los valores. Y también encontramos relaciones entre las competencias en el uso de las plataformas de estudio con la motivación extrínseca de regulación introyectada, pero eso fue una relación baja, pero tuvo ahí la relación, a pesar de que fue baja, fue significativa. Entre las comparaciones de grupos, ya estamos comparando el grupo de los gamers, de las personas que indicaron que se consideran gamers versus los que no se dijeron que no son gamers. Pudimos identificar que en las competencias virtuales en general, que ya es la escala general global, pues se encontraron diferencias estadísticamente significativas en donde los gamers obtuvieron puntuaciones mayores. En este caso, puntuaciones mayores significa que tienen mayores competencias en el uso de las competencias, o sea, en las competencias virtuales. En las competencias ya específicas, que es las competencias generales, también observamos diferencias estadísticamente significativas, donde los gamers también tuvieron puntuaciones significativamente mayores. En las competencias de hojas de cálculo también fueron diferencias significativas. Los gamers también salieron con mayores competencias que los no gamers. Y las competencias de búsqueda de información también observamos diferencias estadísticamente significativas a favor de los gamers también. Donde no observamos diferencias significativas fue en el uso de las plataformas de estudio, donde ahí los no gamers y los gamers pues tuvieron puntuaciones similares, así que no se vieron diferencias ahí. Los análisis, ven esa es la U de Mann-Whitney, un análisis no paramétrico porque los datos no lograron una distribución normal y pues había que hacer una corrección para evitar caer en el error tipo 1 y por eso tenemos la U de Mann-Whitney. Entre las comparaciones con la motivación educativa, la escala de motivación educativa, ahí observamos que no se manifestaron diferencias estadísticamente significativas entre los gamers y no gamers en cuanto a los aspectos motivacionales. en la educación. Como parte del estudio, logramos presentar evidencia de validez y confiabilidad y una estructura factorial para la escala de competencias virtuales. Quedó finalmente con 17 reactivos y sus 4 factores, con buenas propiedades psicométricas. Por lo menos para un arranque exploratorio fueron buenas. Las competencias virtuales se relacionaron con la motivación extrínseca, con regulación identificada. También vimos que esa búsqueda de la información se relacionaba también con otros aspectos de la motivación, básicamente lo mismo que vimos en las correlaciones. Y la motivación intrínseca, al estar relacionada directamente con la autonomía, pues esta promueve el desarrollo académico a través de clases a distancia. Y eso son cosas que hay que tomar en consideración cuando estudiamos los perfiles motivacionales de los estudiantes. Son aspectos, pues, ya sabemos que la motivación es importante, entre otras áreas, para la adquisición de conocimiento. Pues si algo no te interesa, pues no le vas a prestar tanta atención y pues la manera en que eso sella a nivel neuronal no va a ser tan sólida como sellaría si tuviésemos motivación y más interés sobre lo que estamos estudiando. Así que dentro de las comparaciones grupales vimos que los gamers tuvieron puntuaciones significativamente mayores en las competencias generales y otras áreas, menos en el uso de búsqueda de información, y pues que no se identificaron diferencias en la cuestión de las motivaciones, no las vimos, y que los niveles de motivación, pues entonces en este caso pues son independientes de si la persona es gamer o no gamer. Así que ser gamer no tiene que ver nada, o por lo menos en este estudio no se relaciona con tu motivación académica. Eso es básicamente los resultados generales. No tengo más tiempo, ¿verdad? No, pues las implicaciones pues se las puedo pasar luego. Pero van relacionadas a todo lo que ya hemos hablado, así que no va fuera de esa línea. Así que muchas gracias.
My name is Carlos Diaz Varga. I'll be talking about simulating lionfish behavior, exploring artificial intelligence for video game approaches. So first we're going to talk about the lionfish, why they're a worrying topic, why it's difficult to investigate them, to research them. Then we go into artificial life. This is one way in which we can research them without actually having to research them. We can try to simulate their behavior, and then research based on that. Then we'll try to go into how we can model their behavior. And then we'll go into our project, DCR2, which is a artificial life simulation made in the Unity game engine that simulates the Caribbean reef. And then we'll talk about a fuzzy logic, which is an artificial intelligence technique that we use to make and combine vague information, and this is so that we can make more realistic behaviors, and then we'll conclude at the end. So the lionfish, they're native to Indo-Pacific oceans, so kind of like on the other side of the world. They're slow swimmers, but over the last 20 years, they've been known to proliferate in the North Atlantic region, so over here, and they're doing it really, really fast. And they have 18 venomous spikes, so if you touch it, you get hurt and paralyzed. There's very few known non-native predators, so over here there's not a lot of other predators that eat them. They reproduce really, really fast, and so each 4 days they can lay around 12,000 to 15,000 eggs, which if you do it over a year, it would be over more than 1 million. And then they also have a very voracious appetite, which means they eat a lot, and they can eat almost anything. They can also live in multiple environments, so they can survive multiple temperatures and multiple depths. And and they usually hide in rocks and crevices, and they usually live alone, like swim alone, once they're adults. So there's a lot of things here that are worrying, like a lot of very high reproduction rate, almost no predators eat them, they eat almost anything and are always very hungry, and it's very difficult to study them because they can live almost anywhere. They usually hide, and they're not usually grouped up in school when they're adults. And this is like from 1995. They were only spotted near Florida, but now this was over like 4 years ago in 2020. They were spotted in all those regions. So what is artificial life? Well, artificial life is one way we can study them without study them physically. If we are able to replicate the behavior in a program, we're able to study how they can affect the environment and how we can manage them and manage them. So we have two examples over here. One is Foreman's. This tries to replicate the growth of trees over time. It can be for different trees, for different terrains. If you cut some trees down, you can try to see what happens if that happens, and different environments. And we also have Boyd's. It tries to represent the flocking behavior of birds, but this collective behavior can also be seen in fish and other animals as well. But since it's fish, we're interested in that. So Boyd's uses this model called Reynolds. It only has 3 simple rules. One is alignment. Every fish tries to go in the same direction. So the current fish tries to go the same direction as the other fish in that school. There's cohesion. It tries to stay close to that school. And separation, it wants to stay close to the school, but it doesn't want to bump into anyone. So these 3 are, for each individual fish, these are calculated separately and then are summed together to determine the final direction where they're going to go at that time. So this is done with every fish, and then they calculate where they're going to go. And then what happens later is that they're going around as a group, even though they're doing that independently. Later on, there is Goisin, which added to this model by adding informed individuals. Informed individuals are individuals that kind of know a safe route. They might know where there were predators before. They might know where there's food stores, and they could lead the school to somewhere where they want to go. And so each of these have some kind of weight. This weight is how much they're going to follow their own direction where they want to go, or if they're going to follow the school. And how he measured if this was accurate or not is like to see if they were going all in the same direction or not. So there's other behaviors you can model, like being able to evade obstacles, being able to search prey and follow them, and being able to evade predators. And just like in Reynolds, these are calculated separately, but later on, you have to give some priority to some of them. Like, for example, if they see a predator, then the priority is to evade that predator. If they are hungry and they see a prey, then the priority is to go towards that prey. And then they're all summed together to make one final decision to where they want to go. So even though they have all these, they're doing this independently, they do these things called emergent behaviors as a group. They could go as a ball, they could split into 2 different groups, they could join into, from 2 groups into one, things like that. Even though you didn't program them to do that, they do that just because they're following their own individual behaviors. So this is DCER2, Deep Caribbean Reef. This is an artificial light program that simulates the Caribbean Reef. It was created in Unity game engine. It uses Gossain's model along with other behaviors. Like it sets some things together, and then based on the priority of some of the behaviors, it calculates the final direction. And then this can be used for research, can be used for studying these animals, and can be used for teaching about these animals. And as for fuzzy logic, as you can see over here, they have certain things that, like a status, like their current condition, like hunger, size, age, and then we try to calculate what they're going to do afterwards. Beforehand, they did this deterministically, but using fuzzy logic, we can try to translate it into more vague terms, and then combine those terms and calculate the output. But how do we do this? How do we translate something into something vague? So how we call it is a linguistic variable. Here we have an example of temperature, and you can see over here, 42 Fahrenheit is the point where water starts freezing, and we can describe, and I chose to describe these things as freezing, cool, warm, or hot. And we have these bars that represent like how much, how true that statement is for each of these categories. So with freezing, it's just freezing, and that's it. For 40 degrees Fahrenheit, we have the temperature that you have in your refrigerator. It's kind of cold. It's very cold, but it's not freezing. So it's a little bit of both, and so it's a little bit true for both of them. And then we have 72 degrees. That's kind of like room temperature, but a little bit hot. So I chose it as a little bit, it's very warm, but a little bit hot. And so we can describe these things as multiple categories, and you have that. That way you can make it a little bit vague, and then afterwards you can mix them with other types of variables, like if it was temperature, and then you can mix it with humidity, then you can kind of guess how hot it is for you at that moment. And then how do we do this in a program? Well, we try to represent it with the different functions. So as you can see over here, this is the same thing that we had before. Below is the temperature, and then to the y-axis is how true that is. So there was the ice that was in 32. Right now it applies to freezing at degree of membership 1. Then you have the refrigerator temperature at 40, and it has a degree of membership both cool and freezing at around 50.5. And then you have the other one, which is the room temperature, and so on. And that's how we can model this in our fuzzy logic program. And that way we can turn these real values into fuzzy values. So what do we do afterwards? Here we have an example of trying to calculate the speed of the lionfish using only energy and age. So our energy, the total is 1. So in this location, they would have like 20% energy. The age has a total of 1,500. So 1,000 seconds would be around adult, kind of old. So we translate this to a linguistic variable. We have the energy is kind of low and medium. The age is adult old. Afterwards, we have knowledge and inference. Knowledge is basically the rules that we give it. You say if the energy is low, then the speed should also be low. If the energy is medium, then the speed should be medium. Then we do the same thing with age. And then with inference, we combine these two and we get the speed that we have right now at that moment. And then you translate that speed into a number again, and then we give that to the fish again, and then they go with that speed. So in conclusion, artificial life programs like Foreman's and Void simulate real-life behaviors of different organisms. It allows us to study how these behaviors can change, and it helps us to teach about these behaviors. Other applications for these kinds of programs is to study the effects of an invasive species in an environment. We can learn the magnitude of their effects and what one can do to minimize or prevent it. The lionfish is one such species. They have proliferated rapidly over the Western Atlantic Ocean over the last 20 years. Our program, the Caribbean Reef, is a 3D artificial life simulator that demonstrates the Caribbean marine ecosystem. And here we use an artificial intelligence technique called fuzzy logic on the lionfish. This technique lets us handle and combine imprecise information, which in turn could lead us to more realistic behaviors from those animals. So in the future work, there's still more tweaking and the behaviors of the lionfish, but afterwards we will have to work on making the program run more efficiently, try to make it run in parallel, also adding more types of behaviors, like taking into consideration things like waves, and study what kind of individual behaviors affect emergent school behaviors, because we only have some emergent school behaviors. We want to be able to do more of them, and so we have to study what individual behaviors can make us have more of those school grouping behaviors. Then we would have to work on adding more species and create more diverse strains. And yeah, that's it.
Espero que me escuche bien ahí, creo que sí. Yes, muy bien. Ok, les voy a pedir disculpas, también voy a dar mi presentación en inglés. I've given it too many times in English to change it now. I'm sorry. All right, here we go. Mi nombre es Derek Ferrer. Actualmente soy profesor del Departamento de Inglés en el Colegio de Mayagüez. And the project that I'm going to present to you was my thesis, which I defended and graduated from, thanks to, last summer. So we're going to be talking about it. This is called Motivation, Gamification, and Language Learning, Developing Innovative Ways to Create and Retain Motivation in the English Language Classroom. Let us begin. So this all really stems from little 8-year-old Derek in the year 2003 when he was playing Pokemon Sapphire, to be precise. It's better than Ruby, not better than Emerald. And those of you who've played Pokemon might recognize this screenshot right here. This is a Linoon, one of the many creatures you can capture and train in the game, using a move that at the time I would have called Fakeade. And I would have gone, Fakeade, what does that mean? What is that exactly? Of course, later on, after looking it up, I would find out that it's actually pronounced facade. Yes, and so facade is something that is false, something that is not real. And so something was happening in my mind that I did not realize until much later. I was gaining vocabulary from a video game, which is kind of a wonderful thing. And then later on, let's skip forward, say 8 years, something like that. Derek is now in 11th grade. He is in math class, and Derek has an epiphany. Because in the game, the world ends with you. And I'm glad to be in a room where at least one person knows what that game is. Thank God. Yes, there is a character, the one you can see on the left over there with the cap and the black clothing, Shomi Namimoto. And he used to say all sorts of expletives, but he would mask them as mathematical terms. And so one of his catchphrases was SOHCAHTOA. And if you're familiar with math, you'll know SOHCAHTOA is this, this, what is it? There you go, for trigonometry. Thank you very much, right? Sine over hypotenuse, cosine adjacent to hypotenuse, and then TOA is tangent opposite adjacent, okay? And I had no idea what this meant while playing the game. I thought it was a funny little catchphrase until one day in math class, the teacher starts writing these abbreviations. And 16-year-old Derek, there you go. 16-year-old Derek screams from the back of the classroom, SOHCAHTOA! I know what that is. And she goes, okay, good for you. Yes. And again, what was happening here was I was gaining terminology from video games. And so let's fast forward again to the year 2020, when 24-year-old Derek begins his master's degree at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez campus. And he doesn't know what to do for his thesis. And he starts thinking, what can I do? I'm doing a master's in English education. How have I learned? Well, I've learned through video games. Let's make video games. And so that is where this project comes from. One problem that I noticed both as a TA and now as a professor at the university is that creating and maintaining motivation is a huge challenge, right? And of course, motivation is a very, very pivotal component to learning. Language learning motivation specifically is very important because if you are not motivated to learn a language, you will not practice. You will not remember anything. It will all go down the drain as soon as you exit the classroom. And as an English teacher, I notice this a lot, especially in basic English. The thing with basic English is that you get all sorts of students. And when I say all sorts, I mean all sorts of proficiency levels. Some students shouldn't even be there. They just had some sort of error in their placement, while others don't understand a drop of English, right? And so you've got this problem where some are going to be motivated, some aren't, some know English, some don't, yeah? So this project was essentially an attempt to create something new, something a little bit innovative in the classroom to get students a little bit more motivated. Balancing motivation between different proficiency levels was the main issue, Games, however, are a highly motivating medium, as we all know, right? Video games are incredible. You start playing them and you don't stop for 15 hours, and then you wonder why you're hungry and why you're in horrible health and your mother screams at you. And, I mean, that's just how it goes. Yeah, you lose time. Video games are known to be highly engaging as well, and engagement is one of those key ingredients to good education. It's what we're always trying to find as educators. Video games can be a powerful language learning tool. That's what I realized based on my own experience. So here are the research questions for this study. Does the implementation of a gamified learning tool impact learning motivation in students of a basic English classroom? We're going to talk about the term gamification a little bit more towards the end and how my thoughts on that have changed. What aspects of the tool were found most favorable by participants and which were not? And then a sub-question to that was, which of the aspects found favorable had the highest positive impact on learning motivation? Let's talk a little bit about the literature review I did on the topics of motivation and gamification. So motivation is an age-old phenomenon. I mean, I would say that as long as humans have been alive, motivation has been a thing. And not just in humans, right? As others have discussed today, yes, and all sorts of creatures. There are different motivations, mostly for survival. Low motivation is very common in people, and it is very common in classrooms, and even more common in language classrooms. Oops. But it is, fortunately or unfortunately, necessary in language learning. And teachers need motivation too. Several studies have shown that unmotivated teachers create unmotivated students and vice versa. And so really the process of education doesn't go anywhere if motivation is absolutely lost. And then gamification, yeah? A term that I think most of us here are familiar with is the inclusion of game elements in non-game contexts, yes? And so gamification has been big for a few years now in the world of business, yes? Gamifying tasks, okay? It's been happening for a while. people seem to like it. Most learners are familiar with games in some form or another, because even if somebody has never played, you know, what I like to call a real video game in their lives, yes, something with a controller in hand, everybody is familiar with games on the phone. Yes, they're too big to ignore. Reception and perception to gamification has been shown to be very positive, and in many cases it increases productivity. So let's talk about the project itself. What I came up with was a series of 4 very short video games. Each one of these is developed using RPG Maker. For those of you who are not familiar, RPG Maker is a game development tool. I am not a programmer. RPG Maker streamlines the process so that I could still get these games made. Let's talk about them in general first. These are 4 short games based on English grammar, and all of them are focused around an INGL 3102, or Basic English 2 in my university classroom. They would cover the topics of the simple and progressive tenses, modals, the perfect tenses, and the passive voice, and each game was designed to last 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how difficult participants found each one. Each one of these pertain to a different video game genre. So you'll see them actually. Let me not waste time right now describing that. But each of them would have various different elements to drive engagement in learners. And that was the point of diversifying the genres. They had tasks that would go up in difficulty, because difficulty has been shown to increase motivation in certain studies. And like I said, they were all made in RPG Maker, specifically the MV version, which is a bit of an older version, but that's great because there's a billion mods for it, and you can do all sorts of things that you couldn't do in more recent versions. And it was only $20. So here are the title screens for each of the 4 games. We've got Grammar Guard up on the top left, Grammar Repairer on the top right, Sarah Grammar bottom left, and Grammar Warrior, that's my favorite one, in the bottom right. Let's go through each of them really quickly. I'll give you some details on how they operated. Let's start with Grammar Guard. This is the first game that participants played. This is in the visual novel / adventure game genre. It contained various tasks and a bunch of colorful characters. And so in the game, students would perform different, I called them tasks, okay? We could call them levels, yes? Interrogation, negotiation, infiltration. Players took control of a character named Zell, an officer in the Grammar City, what did I call it? The Grammar Guard. There you go, the Grammar City Grammar Guard. That's what it was, okay? This is all part of the story. And it was focused on the simple and progressive tenses. Here are some screenshots of some of the activities. The first one you see over there on the top left is an interrogation. So Zell, the main character, had to interrogate these criminals called verbamites. And so the point of the task was that students had to pay attention to the sentences. If they noticed an error in any of the tenses, then this person was lying. 5 minutes, oh no. Okay, and we've got other tasks. Over here, dealing with tensors. Players had to pay attention to the sentences and reply in the same tense to the questions they were asked. And then at the bottom, which dealt with progressive tenses, players had to find a list of words and input them in the correct order based on their ing form or their progressive form or the present participle, as some might call it. Sarah Grammar was a puzzle game that contained tasks of increasing difficulty. This was pretty much a sort of scavenger hunt. Players had to find items in maps, and so these items would guide them towards other items until they completed several objectives and they could clear the level. Yeah, this was focused on modals. That was a grammar aspect. And so here are some screenshots from that. I won't waste too much time on them. There were some mazes at the end. Hardest part of the game. They hated it. Grammar Repairer is a visual novel, and this one involved repetitive tasks where players took charge of a character who worked repairing letters in their kingdom. This involved a story of turmoil and disaster that players would uncover as they read each letter and corrected every mistake, focused on perfect tenses. Here are some screenshots from that. There's not much going on, right? They had their letters, they had the marked sentences, which they would then read and then select the corrections for each. And finally, Grammar Warrior, my favorite one. This is a role-playing game focused on combat, very akin to old school JRPGs like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, my bread and butter. This had grammar-based combat, so enemies would always speak a sentence at the beginning of an encounter, and then players must choose a corresponding attack. And so each enemy had a different aspect of the passive voice that players had to find in the sentence and then input the correct attack for. And so here are some screenshots of that. On the top left, we've got some instructions. On the top right, we've got an example of using an attack on that bat of voice. And then on the bottom, we have some of the strongest enemies in the game, the Minotaurs of Tens. The study itself, let's go through this quickly. The methodology, this was, of course, a qualitative case study. It involved self-reported data. The population was one section of Basic English 2 students. Participants played the game as part of a grammar-focused unit. Each week, we would discuss the grammar, the related grammar, and then at the end, they would be assigned to play the games. At the end of games, a 4-digit unique code was generated so as to ensure that the data was valid. Games were available 1 week at a time. This is a 4-week unit, and questionnaires with Likert scales and also open-ended questions collected data. The results showed that the reception was generally positive. Every participant enjoyed their experience with the games. An increase in learning motivation was reported, though not measured. Engaging factors, as reported by participants, included the stories of games, the different tasks they had to do to complete each level, and the desire to complete each game, which gives us, of course, a clue of intrinsic motivation. Recommendations included greater length. They wanted to play more. Great. Diversity of tasks. They wanted to do more. Excellent. And some players, I believe it was about half of them, reported that they wanted more difficulty, which, again, is great. In conclusion, let's talk about the limitations. Game development is complicated. 4 short games, 10 to 20 minutes each, took me 7 months. 7 months. And this was, of course, all self-taught YouTube tutorials. Best thing in the world. Yes, 4 short games instead of 1 long one expedited the design process. Originally, I wanted to make 1 big game, but of course, that was not going to be possible with the time I had. And accessibility, because RPG Maker doesn't run on Mac. Nothing runs on a Mac. What is wrong with Mac? Apple, stop. Thank you. In terms of future research, yes, things that can be done. Measuring proficiency, measuring motivation. Yeah, this is what my mentor liked to call the pilot study. It was the beginning of something that needs a lot more development, and that seems to have a great future. Comparing games to other forms of grammar practice might also show, right, if proficiency increases, if there's actual value in using them instead of the traditional stuff, improving on the games based on the feedback received, and creating more video games focused around language learning. This is a sort of gap. We don't have much of this. We used to have edutainment games, but those never really took off. I think a new avenue might be these more traditional styled games specifically used for education. Yes, where it's not necessarily the main focus, but it can help. Although in the case of my games, education was the main focus. And that's about it. General positive response. It went well. There's a lot more to do. If you're interested in making games, RPG Maker is a great way to start. I'll stop it there. Thank you very much.
Lo primero es que yo también soy colombiano, vamos a ir. La segunda es, yo también hice en RPG Maker un videojuego, llamarle videojuego, o sea, sería un alfa, pero con el propósito de enseñar. En mi caso era enseñar cómo pelear con tu pareja. No era ahora que tú traes eso, entiendo yo que eso fue parte de tu investigación para grabar. Eso significa que no ha pasado o que no lo has utilizado en el aula de clase como tal, o ya lo utilizaste, y si lo hiciste, ¿cómo hiciste ese scale up de que sea un participante en un lugar controlado ok, háganlo ustedes, o cómo lo harías si no lo has hecho?
Sí fueron utilizados como parte de la clase. Después de eso también los he utilizado como ejercicios de práctica, más que cualquier otra cosa. Y si puedes repetir lo último, discúlpame que no te escuché bien.
Ok. ¿Cómo es si has hecho o pensado, porque parte de lo que hablaste fue que lo difícil que es llevarlo a otros devices, por lo de Apple, pues sería ese scale-up de una cosa es tener unos participantes, 10 participantes, y otra cosa es tener un salón de clase al cual tú quieras que todos participen de este.
Eso sí, no he hecho nada para el scale-up hasta el momento. El próximo paso sería, yo, ¿verdad?, continuaría con esto como si fuese un alfa o un beta. A mí lo que me gustaría es entonces diseñar algo un poco más formal, con un equipo, con gente que sepa programar mucho más que yo, y yo creo que entonces ahí tendríamos algo que valdría la pena implementar, junto con otras técnicas de investigación como las que mencioné al final. I hope that answers it.
¿Cuáles son las implicaciones del trabajo?
Vamos a terminarlo. Mira, las implicaciones del trabajo es reconocer que los gamers tienen unas destrezas adicionales que podemos fomentar en las personas que no son gamers. Y aprovechando también lo que presentó el doctor, eso también se puede utilizar en el salón de clase. O sea, como vamos a tener en los salones de clase, vamos a tener personas que son gamers y no son gamers, y sabemos que los gamers tienen unas destrezas adicionales que han ido adquiriendo a través de los años de experiencia jugando videojuegos, experimentando diferentes dispositivos. Ahora mismo en Discord se utiliza muchísimo para la comunicación, y esas son cosas que se pueden implementar dentro de los cursos en línea. Nosotros cuando hicimos la investigación fue en plena pandemia, básicamente, en esa transición brusca a la modalidad virtual, y pues no mucha gente estaba preparada para eso. Entonces nosotros descubrimos que primero los gamers tienen cualidades diferentes en cuanto a cómo adaptarse a los cursos en línea comparado con los no gamers, y pudimos demostrar, por lo menos en la muestra limitada obviamente, que en cuanto a la motivación pues no hay diferencia entre ser gamer o no gamer, y esas son básicamente de las cosas principales de las implicaciones.
Lo que sí se encontró, ¿verdad?, que es que para que pueda funcionar en una clase virtual debes tener una motivación intrínseca y también ser autónomo para estar entonces motivado hacia ese tipo de clases virtuales, que no todos tienen las herramientas para ¿verdad?, recibirla y ser productivos en cuanto a ella.
Sus cuestionarios o sus evaluaciones son escalas de Likert, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Ustedes calculan una alfa de Cronbach para ver la cohesión de cada factor, ¿cierto?
Sí.
No me queda claro por qué medir correlación con variables discretas. ¿Por qué hicieron ese cálculo y no utilizaron otro tipo de herramientas estadísticas?
Sí. Primero, una vez que se hace la conversión de cada uno de los ítems, pues son obviamente variables en escala Likert. Hubiésemos hecho correlaciones tetracóricas, por ejemplo, o policóricas, que hubiesen sido adecuadas. Pero también, por ejemplo, cuando vemos autores como Satorra, nos dicen que podemos utilizar correlaciones como producto de Pearson, incluso cuando no hay distribución normal, que por lo general lo que usaríamos sería Spearman-Ross en ese caso, pero Satorra lleva más de 30 años estudiando datos no normales, y él ha dicho que en todas sus investigaciones sobre ese tipo de distribuciones también se pueden utilizar producto de Pearson, que aguanta ese golpe. Y no hay diferencia estadísticamente significativa entre las puntuaciones que te daría una correlación producto de Pearson versus lo que te daría un Spearman-Ross. Obviamente Spearman-Ross va a decaer la correlación, que es lo que haría, pero basándonos por lo menos en las investigaciones de Satorra sobre ese aspecto. No hay tantos cambios realmente en la manifestación de la correlación, y mucho menos también en cuanto a la utilización del alfa de Cronbach y una medida de consistencia interna. Obviamente el alfa de Cronbach no sería la perfecta, tiene montones de críticas el alfa de Cronbach. Hubiésemos utilizado mejor un omega de McDonald, que hubiese sido más ajustado en ese caso, pero básicamente por eso fue que utilizamos eso.
Y como estaban haciendo comparación entre gamers y no gamers, ¿por qué no hacer la prueba de hipótesis con respecto a la proporcionalidad en cuanto a los resultados que obtuvieron?
La prueba de hipótesis, no escuché.
¿Por qué no usaron una prueba NOVA para ver la diferencia significativa entre el grupo gamer y no gamer con la proporcionalidad de las respuestas?
Una ANOVA dice, un análisis de varianza. Primero, porque no tenía distribución normal, no valía la pena hacer una ANOVA. Segundo, eran solamente dos grupos, gamers y no gamers. La mejor opción era una Udeman-Whitney dentro del repertorio de análisis estadístico.
No, pues entonces concluimos este panel. Agradecemos a las personas que han formado parte del mismo por sus presentaciones.